Hi YouTube! We're back! It's a goal of mine for 2025 to be way more consistent on YouTube, so we're starting early. And today we are doing the 2024 book tag. I have a list of questions here. I will put them all in the comments down below if you want to go and film your own version of this. It would also make great content over on TikTok for however long TikTok is still around. But we're gonna get into it. The first question is the most disappointing book that you read this year. Let me check in with the Goodreads. Anyone else use Goodreads as like a second form of social media? Honestly, I have a few that I can put into this category. First, we're gonna go with Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I had really high hopes for this, and I honestly don't really know why. I loved Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I loved Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, and I've tried a lot of his other books, and then Middle of the Night was really just disappointing for me. I love a good paranormal book. I love a book that makes me feel spooky, a book that makes me almost like look over my shoulder, gives me the chills. That's how Home Before Dark made me feel, but Middle of the Night was just really disappointing for me. Also, Dearest by Jackie Walters. The cover of this, again, I had really high hopes for it solely based on the cover. It was giving me like 80s horror film vibes, but the book itself just really fell flat for me. Question number 2, what was an Underdog book? Let's go with The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I have tried a few of their books before, and every single time I'm really not a huge fan of them, but this is one of my favorite romance reads of the year. The banter was amazing. There was a little bit of spice, but it was like the perfect amount of spice. It was just like sprinkled in at the end, and it was just really well done. It was just overall really good. Also, an Underdog book, in my opinion, is The Frozen River. I know a lot of people don't love historical fiction or don't love reading about history in general, but I personally really do. I picked this book up not knowing anything about it. I'm pretty sure I grabbed it on a whim. It probably popped up on Amazon as like a recommended book for me, and I was like, sure, add to cart, and I loved it. It reminded me of Little House on the Prairie, but for grown-ups, and for that reason, yes please. Question number 3, what was an overhyped book that you read? I could probably make a whole video solely based on this topic. Ooh, The 7-Year Slip. You guys know I'm really tough on thrillers, I'm really tough on romance, and I really did not like The 7-Year Slip. Truthfully, I really just don't like the time travel aspect when it's in books. I couldn't get past it with this book. I found it really hard to follow along. Just no. Question number 4, a book that surprised you. I feel like that's kind of similar to Underdog. Let's go Down the Drain by Julia Fox. 1, in the context of what happens within this book, if you want your mind to be absolutely blown, oh my gosh, it's the perfect example of why I love memoirs. I love listening to other people's stories. There were so many things that she talked about in this book, and then would randomly throw in that she was like 13 years old when this event happened to her, and I was genuinely mind blown. It's so crazy how so many of us are living on this planet together at the same time, but are living such different lives, and this is a great example of that. And it's also fantastic on audio. I love Julia Fox's voice. I could listen to her read me an encyclopedia. Your favorite main characters of the year. An honorable mention to The Paradise Problem because I just love their banter together. Honestly, I think I want to go with The Wedding People here. This book started out a little rough for me. I think it took me like 60, 70, 75 pages to really get into it and feel invested in this story. And then by the end of it, it was one of my favorite books of the year. The characters have such an unconventional friendship that blooms basically out of just being in the same place at the same time. And they're hilarious. The entire book was hilarious. Obviously, you're dealing with, yes, some major important topics, but overall, I loved this book. A new favorite author that you discovered this year. Shout out to Nikki Ehrlich, who is the author of The Measure. This was our book club pick for a month this year, and it was fantastic. If any of you out there run a book club, I highly recommend adding this to your book of the month list for 2025. It sparked great conversation within our book club. Really made you think. Borderline dystopian kind of book. Loved it. And her new book is coming out in 2025. It's called The Poppy Fields. For how much I loved this one, I'm really excited to read what else she comes out with. Also this year, I discovered my love of Devney Perry. Oh my gosh. Bow down to Devney Perry for the sole fact that she writes about mature characters. Crossroads, Coach, Indigo Ridge. 3 favorite romances that I read this year solely based on the fact that we're reading about mature characters in mature relationships with actual life problems. An author that didn't work out for me this year. I'm gonna mention John Mars. Now, I'm not done with John Mars. I'm not done reading his books. I'm not writing him off completely. I want to read more of his books, but I read Keep It in the Family this year by him, and I really just didn't like it. But I know a lot of his other books are really fabulous and have really great ratings on Goodreads. I take Goodreads ratings to heart, so I'll give him a chance. Alrighty, next up. What is the happiest book that you read this year, and what book is the saddest book that you read this year? The happiest book that I read this year is probably going to be the start of the Shady Hollow series. I read Shady Hollow, which is book 1, and then Cold Clay, which is book 2. Also Phantom Pond, which is a little novella that they just kind of throw in. You can't not be happy and read these books. It sounds silly because they're a murder mystery kind of vibe that happens in a town full of woodland creatures. The main character is a fox, her best friend is a raven, and then you go down the street to the coffee shop, which is owned by a moose. It's just the cutest little series ever, and it just so happens that there's some murder mystery vibes that happen within these books. I genuinely look forward to reading the next one. And then for the saddest book that I read this year has to be None Left to Tell by Noelle Illy. Oh my gosh. This book was heartbreaking, and the fact that it is so strongly based on a true story makes it that much more heartbreaking and sad. And lest we not forget, the author is distantly related to a lot of the characters that we're reading about in this book. Insane, but so good. The most frustrating book that you read this year. This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. I didn't even need to pull up my Goodreads for that one. I love Carly Fortune because Every Summer After is one of my favorite books of all time. It's a great summer romance, but then she came out with Meet Me at the Lake, and then I was like, okay, one more chance. You're telling me this man is a professional oyster shucker? As somebody who lives in a small beach town, oyster shuckers here are everywhere. But like the fact that he like competes in these oyster shucking competitions and basically it's like sexualized in the book. I remember at one point the main character is like talking about the way his forearms flex as he like cracks open an oyster. The fact that she was trying so hard to sexualize an oyster shucker just really like lost it for me. And an honorable mention goes to A Winter in New York. This was our book club pick for December. I don't want to spoil anything about this book, but literally every issue that this main character comes across in this book is solely for her own fault, and the fact that she's just continuously lying to people. And it's so frustrating. I wanted to literally like rip this book in half because everything we're reading about is so avoidable. Just tell them the freaking gelato recipe. Your favorite book covers of the year. You're gonna see a theme here. First up, we have Good Material by Dolly Alderton. If I were to ever write a book in my life, which will probably never happen, I would want my book cover to look exactly like this. This is so my vibe. The reds, the blues, the yellows, how bold it is. I love the cartoon graphics. Everything about it is just screaming my name. Another honorable mention to Shady Hollow. Tell me that these books aren't channeling what it feels like to pull up to your grandmother's house. She's waiting at the front door. You give her a big hug. You smell her perfume. She's baking cookies. That's the vibe that these covers give off for me. So I love them. Also love the cover of The Wedding People. I did choose this book solely based on the cover and then loved what was inside of it just as much, if not more than the cover. Also a major shout out to my girl Annabelle Monaghan for keeping all of her covers very similar to each other. I just love that. She came out with Summer Romance this year. Nowhere Goes Off Script and Same Time Next Summer both came out a few years ago, but they're all the same vibe. Plus her new release coming out in 2025. It's a love story. My Swiftie heart is screaming. Still fits in with the vibe. Book you haven't stopped thinking about. I have a few that could fit in this category. I have to mention The Grace Year. It's labeled as YA, but don't let that deter you as somebody who really doesn't love reading YA. It also made me realize that I may not be a fantasy girl, but what I do like is dystopian fantasy. I love this book. I think about it all the time, and I also think about the fact that we are truly robbed from the fact that this is not a series. Next question is an unpopular book that you loved. So I'm taking this as like a book that I don't see a lot of people talking about that I personally love. While I'm filming this tag, I'm scrolling past a lot of books that I really loved, but for the sake of the video, I'm trying to like diversify a lot. A book that truly deserves all the hype in the world is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a fantastic memoir. I wouldn't say that it's unpopular, but I feel like because it was published a few years ago, it's kind of looked over, but highly recommend this freaking book. You guys know how much I love this book. Also, Here One Moment by Leanne Moriarty was so good. When you pick up this book, it's a chonker. She's a thick book. It's told with alternating characters, and when you listen to it on audio, each character has a different voice, but it's not done in the cheesy like production kind of way. Cough, cough, Butcher and Blackbird. A book you read this year that you thought you would love, but you didn't. Ooh. I read The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer this year, and I loved it. Don't get me wrong. You guys know I'm a huge fan of World War II historical fiction. The Nightingale is my favorite book of all time, and a lot of you guys, like, this is your favorite book of all time. I read it and I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as everybody else did, or as much as I think a lot of you thought I would. This is kind of a random one, but I really thought I was going to love The Spy Coast, and I didn't. I'm going to read you what I wrote on Goodreads. Genuinely shocked that this has such high ratings. It felt like a Jason Bourne spy movie, but turned into a book and less exciting. I stand by that. Oh, also The Fury. This was our first ever book club pick. Our book club started in February, and this was our book of the month for February. This is the same author as The Silent Patient. I read The Silent Patient. I enjoyed The Silent Patient, just like 75% of the world. But this, no. A book with the most unique concept that you read this year. I feel as though because I'm not a huge fantasy girly, I could put One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns into this category. Obviously it's fantasy, so it's going to be more unique to me than most of the books that I typically lean towards. I love these books, and I feel like they deserve all the hype. Also very unique was Fantastic Land. I know a lot of people like don't really love this book. I personally really did. Imagine that a hurricane is coming. You work at an amusement park, and instead of evacuating the amusement park, you and a bunch of your other employees decide to stay and wait out the storm. Hurricane ends, rescue efforts start. The book's version of the Red Cross assumes that you all are okay. So basically they bump you to the last of the list for the rescue efforts, and in the time between when the hurricane ends and the rescue people get to you, literally turned into a bloody massacre. It's gory, it's graphic, but was so different than anything I've ever read before. It deserves a shout out. Next up, book you read this year that you would reread. Ooh, I 100% would reread Down the Drain by Julia Fox. I feel like I flew through it so quickly because I was eating it up that now if I went and re-listened to it, there was probably a lot of things that I forgot. Also, Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I read this book January 5th of 2024, so like almost a year ago at this point. And I feel like it's just a good listen or read when you're looking for like some sisterly best friend advice. Also, major shout out to the Wayward Pines trilogy. I could reread these books every day for the rest of my life. Probably my top book of 2024. A book you wish you got to this year. I have a ton that I could put into this category. My 10 before the end is definitely lacking. So we'll go through that and I'll tell you all of the books that I basically prioritized at the end of 2024 and then majorly dropped the ball on because I did not read them. First up, As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. You guys are probably tired of me even talking about this book. It was on my 10 before the end. I did not get to it. I do currently now own it though because I got it as an add-on in one of my book of the month boxes. So I have no excuse now. Also, Fahrenheit 451. I feel like this is considered like a modern day classic. I know a lot of people read this back in high school or in middle school, so I feel as though I'm missing out on this. The concept seems absolutely fascinating to me. Also, The Best Lies by David Ellis. He wrote Look Closer, which is one of my favorite thriller books like of all time. This is his newest release and I'm kicking myself that I haven't even picked it up yet. Every time I've gone to the bookstore, whether it's Barnes & Noble or Browseabout, neither one of them have it. And it's been in and out of my Amazon cart like 100 times. I just keep not buying it and I don't know why. Last on my 10 before the end list is Mad Woman. The cover of this one is super intriguing to me and I believe I got it as my book of the month maybe back in like August, September, October, something like that. I do own it. I just haven't read it yet. And then the next question is, what will you prioritize in your 2025 reading year? Okay, so I'm currently reading Red Queen, which is a dystopian fantasy series. It's the first book in a series of 5 and I'm eating it up. And this book, along with The Grace Year, have made me realize that, like I said earlier, I like dystopian fantasy more than I like regular fantasy. So in 2025, I really want to lean more into that. I have a ton of dystopian fantasy recommendations that I got from you guys from Instagram, from TikTok, that are on my want to read list on Goodreads. So that list is just growing exponentially. There are also so many 2025 new release books coming out. That's what my next video is going to be. All of the books coming out in 2025 that I plan on reading. So make sure you come back for that. Thanks for hanging out with me. Like I mentioned, I will put all of the questions that I answered down in the comments if you want to go and make this video as well. Make sure you tag me so that I can see it, and feel free to drop in the comments any videos that you want to see from me on YouTube because we're getting more consistent with it. That's my goal for 2025. I really want to stick with it, especially with everybody talking about the TikTok ban. Love you guys. Bye.